Greetings, greetings, greetings. Hi, everybody. Hi, Bricky. Hi, KD. Hi, Eric. Hey, T. Very good to see y'all. Thank you. Hey, Comrade Kwame. I know someone just said the chat's looking mighty familiar, and that's because we have Black Power Media and APRP people in the chat every episode. It's very delightful, but thank you so much for joining us. My name is Onya Sanwu. This is my comrade Rashad. Hi, Rashad.
What's up, y'all?
We are both organizers with the Southwest chapter of the All African Peoples Revolutionary Party. I am speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, also known as Albuquerque, New Mexico. And Rashad, whose land are you on?
I'm on occupied Ute territory out here in what they call Denver, Colorado. So yeah, we want to land acknowledge all of our tribal nations folks.
Absolutely, the entirety of the United Snakes and most of the Western Hemisphere is European states built on top of stolen indigenous land that was stolen through genocide and trickery and just general chicanery, just like they did to us in Africa, just like they did to Palestinians in occupied Palestine, just like they did to First Nations people in Australia, who we were actually just reading about at Work Study, our last meeting. So all over the world, these European raggedy colonizers stole indigenous people's lands. We want to acknowledge that this land is stolen, and we're not just saying it just to say it. We're saying it because we're coming for it. We're taking it back. Indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere are fighting for their land back. Indigenous peoples in Africa, in Palestine, in Australia are fighting for that land back. Land was taken. Land will be returned. That is a promise. Not just saying it just to say it. Also, we just did the land acknowledgement. The other thing that we always do at the beginning of every show, which you know if you watch it, is we always want to bring in an ancestor, a revolutionary African ancestor. And the reason why we do this is because we understand that we would not be here speaking to y'all today on this stream without the contributions, the sacrifices, the brilliance of the ancestors that came before us, of the African people that made great sacrifices in order to advance our struggle for liberation while they were alive. We would simply not exist to speak to you today without the resistance of our ancestors. So we have to honor them. We have to lift them up. We have to learn from them. The other reason why it's really important to do this as revolutionary African people, as revolutionary colonized people in general, is because this society lies on our actual heroes and elevates sellouts and calls them our heroes. So we get honor for Barack Obama, honor for Kamala Harris, honor for Paul Kagame's raggedy ass in Rwanda, but we don't hear about people like Amilcar Cabral, like we're going to talk about today. We don't hear about people like Winnie Mandela. We don't hear about people like Tina Celia. So we don't hear about our true heroes. So we have the responsibility to talk about them. So we can't let the system lie on them. So the ancestor we want to bring in today is none other than Kwame Nkrumah, founder of the All African Peoples Revolutionary Party, the first president of Ghana after Ghana won its independence from British colonialism. He died yesterday, April 27th, in the year 1972 in Budapest, Romania, from cancer. He died after being overthrown in a U.S.-backed coup in Ghana that pushed him out of power and pushed him into exile in Guinea. In Guinea, he was made co-president beside Sekou Touré. And while in exile in Guinea, he still fought tirelessly for the African Revolution, still fought tirelessly for the political objective of Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. And it was actually in that exile that he wrote the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is nothing less than the blueprint for the African Revolution. In that book, he calls for the formation of our organization, the All African Revolutionary Party, because he understood after he came to power, like the so-called correct way, through a peaceful mass movement, through a democratic process where the masses of people in Ghana chose him to lead and chose the CPP to lead. And they engaged in a process of nationalizing Ghana's resources, of creating good jobs and housing and political power for the massive African people in Ghana, and where he started to engage in struggles to unite African liberation movements across the continent. He did it all the so-called right way, and still the US and Britain pushed him out of there, demonized him in the press, tried to turn the mass of people of Ghana against him. And so after that experience, he realized that there was simply going to be no way of peacefully getting power within a capitalist and imperialist system. The enemy will not allow it. They will not allow us to vote our way to freedom or to peacefully mobilize our way to freedom. The only way that we are going to see lasting liberation and unification of the African continent is with a straight up revolution, an armed struggle, and the organization of the masses of people in a society around the objective of total liberation, around the objective of the destruction of capitalist and foreign domination, and the building of a socialist system. So he understood that clearly. He wrote it down in the handbook. He called for the formation of our party, the All African People's Revolutionary Party. He also called for the formation of the All African Committee for Political Coordination that would serve as the governing body of the One Unified Socialist Africa. And he called for the formation of the All African People's Revolutionary Army, which is intended to be an African continent-wide army that can defend the African Revolution. Right now, what we have on the continent is French-backed armies, US-backed armies, puppet armies, neo-colonial armies that exist to serve the interests of the imperialist powers, looting Africa and exploiting African people. We do not have armies on the continent that are fighting for African liberation and African people. We only have armies on the continent that are fighting to defend the exploitation of that continent. So the All African People's Revolutionary Army is meant to be the formation that will actually defend the continent and fight that armed struggle. So shout out to Kwame Nkrumah, the visionary, the reason why we are here. This person made a strong contribution to the African Revolution and also to the global struggle to build communism, even though he gets no credit because people think that African people are not capable of developing our own independent political analysis because you're racist. But Kwame Nkrumah did, and he is the reason why we exist today. And so we honor that ancestor. So today, for the political education component of the show, we're going to be talking about another revolutionary African leader and another revolutionary African formation. That formation is the PAIGC, and that leader is none other than Amilcar Cabral. So to kick it off, I'm going to pass it to Rashad.
Yeah, so this is the PAIGC and Amilcar Cabral are the PAIGC is a party and a revolutionary organization that is like near and dear to all of our hearts as Africans, and they're like a beacon of what it means to do things in a revolutionary way, in a humanist way, in a dialectic way, and and it serves as a beacon, as just as a positive progression for humanity. And so obviously we want to lift up Amilcar Cabral as the leader and as the one of the founders of the party of the PAIGC. But as he would say, I want to read some quotes from him just so we understand that like he was a product of his people, and so and he would say that. And so I'm going to read some quotes just so we can understand that he was a product of the people, and he wasn't just some he didn't do it all on his own. So first, he says, we must act as if we answer to and only answer to our ancestors, our children, and unborn. And next he says, this is when he gave a speech to the PAIGC members, and he was talking about, he said, Tony Gifford told you guys that I'm a great revolutionary. And he says, it's not true. I'm a simple African man doing my duty in my own country in the context of our time. My comrade Ron Phillips said that I am his hero. We have no heroes in our country. The only heroes are the African people. And so I just, I think that like sums up who, that's a good like little summary. Those statements from him are a good little summary about who he was and how he thought and how it helped to progress the PAIGC in their struggle against Portuguese colonialism. But so we'll dive in. We'll use that as a backdrop, and we'll dive into who Amilcar Cabral was. And so Amilcar Cabral, he was born in Guinea-Bissau in a town called Bafata on September the 12th, 1924. And so, Guinea-Bissau is a landmass on the continent of Africa. And his parents were from Cape Verde, which is an island, a little archipelago, almost like a few thousand miles away from Guinea-Bissau, the mainland. And so, he was raised in Guinea-Bissau in Bafata, and very early on, him and his parents got divorced, and he was raised by his mother. And they experienced hard times and stuff like that because she was a single mother and she was working and stuff like that. And but that backdrop of poverty, of growing up in poverty, it really shaped him early on, in like, along with what things his father had taught him. But experiencing that, it helped him early on to realize that everything wasn't all roses and glory in the Portuguese colony that he grew up in. So early on though, he grew up. He like proved himself to be a brilliant student, obviously, and he finished his schooling that was supposed to be, I think, 12 years total, and he did it in 7 or 8 years. And so eventually he ended up going to Portugal to study to be an agronomist. And so that's what a lot of our revolutionaries did from Africa. They had to go to the metropoles that were colonizing their countries at the time. They had to go and study there or in America because, because of the underdevelopment that was caused by colonialism and the oppression and suppression of the people in those countries. And so Amilcar Cabral went to Lisbon in Portugal to study to be an agronomist. And that's where he started getting and this is around like the 1950s. And this is where he starts, forming his political, like the beginnings of his political ideology and stuff like that. And he's joining organizations, he's starting organizations. And I think one of the most important things that happened, and it's crazy because the colonialists, we understand that they will literally create conditions that shoot their own selves in the foot. And so, they colonize these nations, and so and they end up giving scholarships to go study in their metropoles. And all the problems in the metropole, the people from there, they're complaining. So the African revolutionaries, they're seeing that they already saw the conditions in their own country, and they understand that something's not right. And then what happened to Amilcar Cabral is he gets to meet other revolutionaries from other Portugal dominated African nations, or how they would say Portuguese colonies. And so he in Lisbon, he ends up meeting Agostinho Neto, who people might know is another one of Africa's greatest revolutionaries and leaders, who started the MPLA movement for popular liberation of Angola. He met him there, and there they started a couple of little organizations fighting, doing student stuff, but also doing subversive work for like other nations and stuff like that. And so, yeah, you can already see he's 21 when he's in there, when he goes to Portugal to study to be an agronomist. He's 21 and he gets to meet all these revolutionaries, and he's already starting to organize and stuff like that. And so, like, they should have seen it then, but they didn't. So then, he ended up graduating the top of his class, and he was the only African in the agricultural engineer program. He was the only African, and he graduated top of his class. And so then he ended up going back to study. It's another case of like the colonial regime creating conditions that shoot themselves in the foot, because they send him back. He gets his agronomy degree. He goes back and they tell him to go study, the soil and the land in Guinea and Cape Verde. And so he goes back and he's able to like really ascertain the terrain of his whole country. He's able to speak to people and do his job. But also, while doing it, he was able to organize people and mobilize people and make them understand and help them understand why liberation was necessary, and why the PAIGC would be the vehicle. And so that's a good stepping point from that's his background. And so after he left Portugal and went back to Guinea and Cape Verde, and he started doing his agronomy work. That's when he decided. That's when he, piggybacking off of the work that he was doing in Portugal, organizing and starting organizations. He decided to create. I can't remember the name of the formation before it became the PAIGC, but he had a little formation that he started before, and then it turned into the PAIGC in 1956. And so in the beginning, he and his other comrades, including his half brother, we don't really do the half brother thing in African nations, but him and his half brother Luis, they began to, and some other comrades, they began to form the PAIGC, and it was meant to be in the beginning a just like a like some peaceful protest type shit. And so they would peacefully protest, and they were supposed to be a peaceful resistance to Portuguese colonialism, and just basically asking and saying, hey man, this isn't right, we should we deserved our independence. And that's going on for a couple of years, and the tide turned when some dock workers were protesting in 1959 in June, I believe, June 1959. Yes, June 1959. September 1959. I'm sorry. In September 1959, some dock workers were protesting, and it became known as the PAIGC massacre, where 50 dock workers were murdered and thrown into the sea by the Portuguese colonial regime, and another 100 were injured. And so that was like a turning point in the formation of the PAIGC. A couple of weeks later, maybe like a month later, they decided they had a secret meeting. Amilcar Cabral and his comrades had a secret meeting in Guinea-Bissau, and they decided that they would transition into an armed struggle. And so we understand that like that's part of his brilliance. That he never outstepped his bounds. He never went and was like, oh well, this is going to happen. This needs to happen. He analyzed the situation always before acting, and then they would collectively decide what was the best course of action. And so they decided that it was apparent that armed struggle was needed, and that was in so that was in 1959 after the PAIGC massacre by the Portuguese colonial regime. And so that lasted for about like 3 years, where they transitioned into the armed struggle phase of liberation. And it wasn't until and so during that 3-year period, they began to like really organize their base in the rural areas, because that's they realized that the fight wasn't necessarily going the way they wanted to in the cities per se, and in the big metropolitan areas. And so they decided to move their bases into rural areas. And that was another tactical decision that he decided from practice. He always, Amilcar Cabral and his comrades, they always made it so that they could analyze the situation ahead of time and then act. And so they would theorize, but they had to put it in practice so they can actually address the dialectic, and then the movement, the internal dynamism of the movement. And so they did that for about 3 years, and then in 1962, that's when basically everything started going. That's when the Portuguese started to pick up their forces and stuff like that, because they realized that things were changing, and that the PAIGC were gaining support amongst the rural masses and even in the metropolitan areas. And so they began like a big like mobilization of repression. And so that also helped form the tactics going forward. And so Amilcar Cabral began speaking, going to the international community, and bringing facts and talking to the international community, and trying to help, trying to at least garner some type of support from the international community. But we see that that led to NATO intervening. And so Portugal was one of the founding members of NATO, and they weren't like a big power at the time. They were like their government was a fascist government, and so the level of economic development of Portugal was not significant enough to hold three set colonies, including Sao Tome, to another part of Africa that they had, and so they didn't have enough resources to outstretch their arms to three different colonies and fight three different revolutionary decolonial movements. They didn't have it, so they began to get resources from NATO, considering they were one of the 12 founding members. And so Amilcar Cabral, he talks about in some of his speeches that, like, you guys claim, the international community claims, and to be this force for good, but yet you're allowing, and you guys talk about self-determination of nations. That wasn't like, that a lot of that comes from them. They talk about self-determination of nations, NATO, and the Western powers. They talk about that shit. And so Amilcar Cabral, he's Ricky, fuck NATO. And this is part of the reason why, because they posit themselves as a defensive organization, but we understand through history, and so that they actively suppress revolutionary movements for liberation around the world. And so one of these instances is in Guinea and Cape Verde, and the other Lusophone or Portuguese colonies, Angola and Mozambique and Sao Tome. And so they didn't have the economic or the resources to outstretch those arms to those three colonies and actually fight. But they began to get funding and aid, and he talks about in his speeches that they were getting weapons and missiles. They began using U.S. Like tactics, using napalm and other chemicals for chemical warfare against the people in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde and the other Portuguese colonies. I hate calling them that, but I guess we'll just stick with that for now. So they began using, they're getting all this aid from America and other NATO powers. He actually goes into detail about in one of his speeches and says that they received aid of $500 million in U.S. dollars in the 70s, and so this is actually right before he was murdered. But yeah, so they're getting aid throughout this entire 10-year period of revolutionary struggle, and they wouldn't have been able to last that long because they were suffering extreme blows in all three countries, and they wouldn't have been able to last that long. And I just think that's an important thing. He wanted it to. He made sure that it was important that he got that out there when he was speaking to the international community, that it's extremely hypocritical for the it's extremely hypocritical for the international community to posit themselves as a global force for good and stuff like that, and they support all this and that and liberation, but actively give money and aid to countries who are murdering and involved in genocidal actions in other countries. And so we understand that. And the whole time, that Portugal's ruled by this fascist government, they don't even view the government didn't even view Africans as humans. You know what I mean? The president, the president, the dictator, his name is Salazar in Portugal. He used to often say that Africa it doesn't even exist. It's not a place. And so, like, the international community understood this. And so NATO knew that. They knew that, they were supporting a fascist government. And so we see that in Guinea, and we see that in the other Portuguese colonies. And we see that just in general throughout history. NATO has constantly been a force on the side of fascism, on the side of Nazis, on the side of genocide, on the side of anti-liberation. And so, so we'll table that about NATO. But that's that's how Portugal was able in Guinea-Bissau was able to continuously fight the PAIGC for about 13 years, 12, 13 years. And so so I guess we'll get into now how the PAIGC like operated and how they formed. And so I'll pass it to Anisanu so you can explain how the PAIGC actually has, as a revolutionary formation, has roots in the AAPRP.
So it's a little bit confusing. I explained it to Rashad before we got on, so I'm going to try to explain it again. So the All African People's Revolutionary Party, when you read the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, where Kwame Nkrumah calls for its formation and talks about how it works and talks about how the ACPC works and how the APRA works, one thing you find is that he's talking about the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African People's Committee for Political Coordination, comprising representatives from revolutionary organizations across the African continent. The APRP, as it exists today, exists in Africa and exists throughout the diaspora. But when people think of the APRP, they tend to think of the diaspora formation, the part that Rashad and I are part of. The APRP should actually be best understood as an umbrella organization. So within the APRP, from the very beginning, we had the PAIGC. And to this day, there are members, there's a comrade Imani, who is a cadre within the APRP, who is on the central committee of the APRP, and he's also on the central committee of the PAIGC. He grew up in St. Louis. He now lives in Guinea-Bissau and speaks fluent Portuguese and contributes day to day to the organizational work of the PAIGC. The other revolutionary African organizations that are part of the APRP, so there's the Diaspora Wing, that's us. There's the PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau. There's the PDG, the People's Democratic Party of Guinea. There's the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. There's the Amilcar Cabral Ideological Institute in Nigeria. There's another liberation movement in Zimbabwe. I apologize, the name is escaping me right now. But basically understand the APRP itself as an umbrella formation. We are the diaspora wing. There's also the PIGC, the PAC, the PDG, ACISM. So that's how it is. So the PAC, the PIGC, and the APRP are all in the APRP. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. But speaking of how the PIGC organized, Comrade Zizwe, who is a APRP cadre in, I believe, the Illinois chapter, Ohio chapter, just mentioned in the chat that part of the reason why the PIGC was successful in the armed struggle against Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau, and also why the MPLA and Frelimo were successful in Mozambique and Angola, was because of the leading role that African women were allowed to play in those liberation struggles. They recognize, all of those formations recognize that, the Zimbabwe organization is the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU-PF. So that's the other organ, the APRP. So we made it confusing because what happened was when Kwame Nkrumah wrote the handbook, he organized the first work study circle. In that first work study circle was Kwame Ture, very, very famous, one of the leading cadre in the party when he was alive, Lamine Yanga, Sekou Neblet, who is a cadre in the Ghana chapter, but formerly a member of the Black Panther Party and SNCC, and Amilcar Cabral. He gave each one of them a copy of the handbook. He told Kwame Ture, build the party in the diaspora. He told Sekou Neblet as well. He told Lamine Yanga, build it in East Africa. He told Amilcar Cabral, build it in West Africa, and engage in the armed struggle, obviously in Guinea-Bissau. So each of them went off to take their assignment and to build their mission. They did it. The APRP grew quite a bit in that first period. But when Kwame Ture went to form the diaspora organization took the name APRP, which made people think the APRP was mainly the diaspora formation. But it's not. It's an umbrella. It's all of these organizations together. So really, we should not have done that. We should not be called the APRP because the APRP is comprised of all these different organizations, including the PIGC. So hopefully that makes sense. But in any case, so the PIGC, among many other mass revolutionary Pan-African organizations fighting national liberation struggles in the continent in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s understood that there was no way they could win those struggles if half of the population, a significant portion of the population, was not allowed to fight. Colonial conditions impose conditions of oppression and exploitation of all African people, but particularly of African women, marginalized gender folks, and children. And so one of the first tasks of the PAIGC and other revolutionary formations was to make African women and youth into revolutionaries, into soldiers of the African Revolution. And so on the show before, we've talked about people like Theodora Gomes, we talked about people like Titina Sylla, who were militants within the PAIGC, who were, in the case of Titina Sylla, quite young women who were on the front lines of the armed struggle in Guinea-Bissau and who were also leaders within the PAIGC. There is an excellent book about the anti-colonial struggle in Guinea-Bissau called Fighting Two Colonialisms. It was written by a European woman, Stephanie Erdang. And it's actually like it's like a first-hand account, a primary source comprised of interviews with PAIGC militants, particularly women, talking about how they waged the struggle against the stated two colonialisms. One was obviously Portuguese colonialism. The other, though, was the internal contradiction of patriarchy within the masses of African people in Guinea-Bissau. And so in that book, you see a lot of accounts of the day-to-day organizing of women in the PAIGC, because they had to not only recruit women and train them, they also had to convince the whole of society that this was cool to do after they had been told for generations that women weren't allowed to do that kind of shit. So one of my favorite parts of the book is when they go into the rural areas of Guinea-Bissau and they have the women of the PAIGC attempting to recruit them, attempting to mobilize them and bring them to the struggle. And like you oftentimes see that the women themselves in the rural areas were skeptical at first because it was so different from what they'd experienced. And you see the women of the PAIGC leaning on African culture, but also leaning on that dialectical and historical materialist analysis to help the masses of women in these rural areas understand that they have an equal role to play, that everybody has a position to play. Another one of my favorite parts, because it's so familiar, is a part where Titina Sylla is engaged in like a political education session with a number of African men in the PAIGC, and the African men are talking about how some women like sleep around, and that's not cool. Women should not do that. And like Titina Sylla is like, what business is it of yours who they are sleeping with? Why do you get a say? Why should that determine what their character is or how you should judge them? And I remember when I first read that, especially like being exposed to like extremely anti-feminist attitudes in Black nationalist and Pan-African spaces, I was like, this lady is making a clear feminist argument for the autonomy of women and like treating women like human beings with agency and not sexual objects that exist to be submissive to men. And she was just like, she like laid it down. And these men were like, all right, because they respected her. And I was like, they, at the same time as they were waging an armed struggle against Portuguese colonialism, backed by NATO, they were also engaging in these concrete political and ideological struggles against internalized misogyny and patriarchy. Oftentimes, in the so-called modern day of 2022, people say that we got to pick one. They say there's a primary contradiction of imperialism and everything else has to take a back burner. And the PAIGC was like, no. If we want to actually win this struggle, we have to organize every sector of society in Guinea-Bissau, including women, young women, youth, etc. If we are going to organize every sector of society, we have to fight for the liberation of each sector. And so what people would describe as feminist political struggle was a part of the PIG's strategy to mobilize and organize women. I feel like if Titina Sylla was in a meeting today with some of y'all, that y'all would be like, this is feminism, this is destroying the Black family. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you wouldn't be trying to hear it. But they used that strategy and they won. And they won. So what does that show you? It shows you that we can understand what the primary contradiction is. We can understand what secondary contradictions are, but we have to understand that's like not a hierarchy. It's just letting you know that all the secondary contradictions are born from that primary contradiction. So you have to attack that. But that also means that you got to address those secondary contradictions to build the fighting force to attack the primary contradiction. And there's nothing wrong with feminism. There just isn't. There just isn't. So yeah, that was like a really important component of how the PIGC organized, how they made women, young women, like Tatina Celia was 18 years old when she joined the PIGC, and she was like leading shit. How they engaged in this work of creating like a truly egalitarian fighting force. And I feel like that is a remarkable lesson for us to learn in the modern age, because we're kind of regressing in terms of the struggle against patriarchy, in terms of the struggle for the liberation of women and marginalized gender folks. So yeah. Anything you'd add to that, Rashad?
Yeah, just that, dude. Yeah, just that, just that. That's like you said, that was a part of the whole organizing strategy, and so it isn't, you know, they had a thing in the PAIGC where they would say that, like, women had to fight. It wasn't, liberation of women wasn't something that was gonna come and stuff like that. Like, the women had to actually take it, and they had to fight it from below and from above. And so that was like a thing that they used to say: we had to fight it from below and up from above. And they had to actually organize the women themselves and take that power back, and take that organizing, and take that organizing back, and take it, and being able to actually liberate themselves. And because that's, it wasn't going to be men who benefit from the patriarchal systems that were imposed on them, or that were there from, remnants of culture before, but it had to be the women who liberated themselves. And so to do that, you have to educate them. You have to actually make things equitable in work, in positions of leadership. And that's what they did. They Amilcar Cabral would talk. He's like, dude, like, you would tell his, I was reading the speech, and he literally was just telling me, he's like, y'all, we're going to put women in positions of power in the PAIGC because that's what's necessary. You know what I mean? Like, and so they would say that, it couldn't be done by decree, but that was something that they're like, no, this is happening because it's, it's a necessary part of the struggle against the people. You can't cut off one half of the people. And I think in Guinea-Bissau, it was actually more. There were more women to men in Guinea-Bissau. I think it was like a 1 to 2, a 2 to 1 ratio or something like that. But yeah, so yeah, so that's, that was explicitly understood by at least the leaders and stuff like that, and they made it so. And in the committees that were going on, that were started in the rural areas and within the PAIGC and wherever they were, they had to have at least 2 women in the positions of leadership in those committees, and that was, at the least. And so it was an active thing that they worked for. And like you said, I think some of us are regressing in because we've allowed the European culture, and specifically the American culture, to seep into us like way too hard. And it's understandable, because it's understandable technically because of how long they've been doing it, and how sophisticated their machines of control and manipulation are. But at the same time, I mean, bro, it's like, to me, it's fucking obvious. It's right there in our face. Without women, there is no revolution. Without women, there is no radical change of society. You can't get there without them. And so, yeah. So yeah, that's what I had to say about that.
For sure. And like, one thing that stands out to me about the approach they took to fighting that second colonialism of patriarchy, internal patriarchal contradictions, is that it wasn't treated as necessarily an antagonism between men and women, or marginalized gender folks and men, or whatever. Like, it wasn't like, we're going to organize the women against the men. It was, we're going to organize the women to build their political power, to build their consciousness, so they can like demand what is needed, and that so that they can play their position. But it wasn't a situation where they were like, fuck the dude, because they couldn't. They were fighting an armed struggle. They were fighting against internal contradictions, but they were also fighting an armed struggle against an external enemy. And in that case, if they had said, kill all the men, which is, a real thing that people say, they would have lost. They would have fucking lost. And so I feel like one lesson that we should learn about addressing internal contradictions is understanding that, again, they come from that primary contradiction, which means that it's not anything intrinsic to men or to anyone that benefits from patriarchy or any of these like secondary contradictions. It's all coming from that primary contradiction, creating the conditions that produce these secondary contradictions. If you take that analysis, then you understand any kind of like across the board anti-man line is going to be counterproductive. You have to address those secondary contradictions by struggling internally to build unity, not to build antagonism, because ultimately we're only going to take out that primary contradiction as a unified force. The way we get to that unified force is by struggling through those secondary contradictions, but not treating them as antagonistic, not saying the only way to resolve them is to kill all the dudes or to like kill all the abled people or whatever, you know, contradiction exists, you know? I hope that makes sense.
I think it makes great sense. And so, yeah, like, I think that's like a decent segue into like the next point, just about the PAIGC and Amilcar Cabral. And because the way they were, you know, so they started the struggle in 1959, we'll say, you know, that's when the armed struggle started. And so they declared independence in 1973, although it wasn't recognized until actually the 25th of April in 1974. It wasn't recognized by the international community for a whole year after the PAIGC, you know, after they recognized it. But the reason they were able to fight like that was, you know, part of the reason was because of the way they organized women, but also just the way they organized in general. And Amilcar Cabral talked about not only having the people be guerrilla fighters, they had to also had to read and be theoreticians and stuff like that. They all had to practically theorize how they were going to maneuver and how they were going to strike blows against the colonial regime, the Portuguese colonial regime. And so he recognized that was, you know, he recognized the interconnectedness of that, of making sure that the guerrilla fighters were also educated in general and that they can read, because you know, the Portuguese left them extremely fucked up. Like, you know, I don't know how true it was, but in one of the books about Amilcar Cabral, Return to the Source, they say the African Index, something like that. They say that over 99% of people in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde could not read, like in the 1940s. And so, you know, either way, we understand that the Portuguese left them extremely fucked up. So, you know, he made Amilcar Cabral and the PAIGC, they made it prevalent and known that they had to also, you know, you couldn't just pick up a gun and shoot. You also had to think, and you also had to be able to theorize about why you were doing it and exactly what's going to come from it. And I think what sums it up, they had a motto of unity and struggle. And so when they would talk about unity, they would make it known that unity wasn't just like some like abstract thing where they just meant, oh, we're just unified. You know what I mean? Like, they took the differences between each other and they recognized them and they understood them, but they recognized that they were fighting, like we were just talking about, they were fighting one enemy, and that enemy was Portuguese colonialism and imperialism. They were fighting that. And so the unity wasn't just something, they recognized it as a movement and as a dialectical process. And so unity, as described by them, was a movement, and it was fluid. And just because they achieved unity doesn't mean they had to stop, like that stopped the revolution. That doesn't mean it stopped continuing to organize to build further unity. You know what I mean? Like, that was going to be a constant struggle. And then when defining struggle, you know, they used it as a he used it. I don't know, the way he defined struggle was just, it was interesting to me. But I think he had a quote about people being mountains, and so he would talk about how he had a speech or an interview where he was talking about how the people, they didn't have mountains, they don't have like big mountains and stuff like that in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. It was a flat land, and he was like, so we had to build the people as mountains. And so he used struggle as a way of understanding that it was the people who had to struggle, and that the struggle, that through struggling that they would progress, and that would be the driving force. It would be the people, and that they had to be the force in front of colonialism. It couldn't be it couldn't be just a terrain. They had to make themselves an obstacle. And so that was, I just, that's the only way they could last through Portugal getting funded by, some of the richest countries in the world and stuff like that, receiving all this aid and losing a good amount of their fighting forces. They lost, I think there was 10,000 fighting members in the PAIGC. And I think in 12 years of struggle, they lost like 4 to 6,000 of them. And so it's, to me, it's harrowing and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, exactly. The way they organized their people, the way the PAIGC organized, they ended up liberating 3/4 of the whole country. And so in the liberated zones, they were able to actually implement the things that they were talking about in the liberated zones. And so, they were able to hold democratic elections of people. They were able to build institutions and educate their people further. I can't remember how much, but it had grown so much. They had women who, before the struggle, there was 6 women educated in and I think medicine. And by the I think it was 1972, by the time he gave one of his speeches, it was 495 or something like that. And so, yeah, those liberated zones, like Ricky's saying in the chat, those liberated zones were extremely important because they he talks about it a lot in some of his speeches, that how beautiful it was, and that it wasn't that they had. It wasn't, the fact that they were killing Portuguese people. It was the fact that they were able to actually start building and start creating the things that they were thinking about, and that they were able to reconnect with their humanity, and that they were able to return to their history. And so that's another big aspect. And you hear that quote from him a lot. You'll hear people, when they mention Cabral, they'll talk about returning to the source or returning to history. And I think that was a big part of the whole movement, and how the PAIGC was structured, and how they went about the struggle against Portuguese colonialism, and how important history and culture was to them, and how important building that and sustaining that was important to them and important to the movement. They understand was, he often talked about, Amilcar Cabral often talked about the fact that, you couldn't just supplant different movements, liberation movements into where you're at. He understood that Guinea-Bissau had its own history, even with Portugal, and it wasn't the same as going to be Angola, which was, the other Portuguese, or Mozambique. It wasn't going to be the same as them, and so they had to analyze their specific situation. And so that's how they were able to win, because that culture aspect of everything, and analyzing exactly how people function in where you're at, is extremely important, and it can't be lost in the liberation struggle. He talked about economics. Cabral talked about economics and culture, and how obviously the material conditions of people are what drives us and stuff like that. He would, there's another quote people say, and people aren't fighting for ideals in folks' head. They're fighting to improve their conditions. They're fighting for the health of their family, the safety of their family, of their kids and their loved ones. And so he understood that although the economic factors and the material conditions were extremely important, but he also realized that without the culture aspect and returning to pre-colonial aspects and ways of being was extremely important in developing that into something that was progressive, and into something that adapted to history. And so he wasn't just saying, oh well, let's take everything from let's just take everything from what we did before the Portuguese came, and then we just got it, we're good. He's like, no, well, we have to analyze what was going on and what was good about that, implement into right now, analyze our situation right now, and implement good stuff and positive things, progressive things that are going to help us win and sustain revolution and progress humanity here, and also take in from other places. He was big on He helped found the OSPAAL, which is the organization for Asian and African and Latin American unity and stuff like that. So yeah, he helped organize that, and so he was big on learning from other places, but not just transplanting, copy and pasting that into the liberation movement of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. He made it, they made it a point to understand that, we'll learn from them, but we have to analyze and put in practice what we're doing here in our situation here. And so I think that's like the most, that's one of the most important things. And so like I guess we'll try and close up kind of soon. So like I'll talk about the lessons for today and what Cabral and what the PAIGC can teach us for today. And that's really that mass organization is the key to liberation. And we don't want one Malcolm X. We don't want one Amilcar Cabral. We need, thousands of them, because we understand that, unfortunately, we understand, unfortunately, that both of them were murdered. But in speaking of Cabral was murdered in 1973, January 12th. I'm pretty sure 1973 he was murdered. Yeah. And so he was murdered in 1973. With the aid of the Portuguese secret police, which is like their CIA, is called PIDE, with the aid of them in sowing disruption in between the party, they were able to murder him outside either his house or the PAIGC headquarters in 1973. And so, but that didn't, that's what they can that's what the PAIGC teaches us, and that's a great lesson to learn, that it didn't stop right there. I mean, like that was, they were already gearing up for the announcing that that they were independent, that they were free from the Portuguese, and that's a part of the reason why they murdered him, because they was like, okay, well, if he's here when they do that, yeah, it's gonna be over then. And so they were afraid, and so they murdered him. But what we can learn is that it did stop right there, because they had supreme organizational skills, and they had all these people who were able to continue the revolution. And I just think that's something extremely important that we have to remember today, because we get a lot of like anti-organization stuff, and a lot of like, oh well, organizers, or you're just this and you're just that, and it's extremely funny. Because we have models right there. We have models that worked. Comrade Zizwe is talking in the chat, and the PAIGC, the MPLA in Angola, and Frelimo in Mozambique. They were successful in their efforts, and in Frelimo, they killed Eduardo Mondlane, but it picked right up with Samora Machel, and so. And in the case of the PAIGC, they killed Amilcar Cabral. A couple weeks later, at Amilcar Cabral's funeral, they killed Tatina Sia. Unfortunately, another, the leader we were talking about, the women revolutionary we were talking about earlier. And so, they killed her, but it didn't, the revolution didn't stop, and it was able to continue, and they were able to actually claim victory. And so, literally months after they murdered Amilcar Cabral. And they were able to actually find the people who did it in spirit of the PAIGC and the Amilcar Cabral. I think I didn't mention this, but I think it's extremely important. He was such a good dude, bro. Like, he was such a good dude, and he fostered that throughout the PAIGC. He would always talk about, like, we're not happy that we're killing Portuguese people. We understand that they're being forced to do this, or coerced in some type of or manipulated in some way to come fight for their own government here, and we don't want to like celebrate killing. We don't want to celebrate killing them. We're celebrating liberation. We're celebrating returning to our history, returning to our culture and stuff like that, and bringing about actual tenets for progressive humanity. And so they were always releasing Portuguese prisoners of war, were always doing things in good faith, always continuously trying to um, um, also operate under the guise of diplomacy and trying to talk things out. They understood that that wasn't going to work, but he never stopped trying. They were like, we're just going to cut that line of communication off. He was always trying, like, hey, dude, let's just get this done. We don't have to fight. We don't have to like have our own people die. He tried. They tried, and so I think that's extremely important. That he didn't have to. They didn't kill. They weren't killing just to kill. When they found the people that murdered Amilcar Cabral in the spirit of the PAIGC, some of them unfortunately had to be executed, but a lot of them were taken prisoner or under house arrest. And so I think that's extremely important. You see that kind of saw that in Mozambique too with Samora Machel, where traitors, they weren't killed, they were brought back, and they were forced to talk about what they did, and he tried to integrate them into their society and understand that you were coerced into this. And so I think that's extremely important in the revolution, that he wasn't just he wasn't happy about having to murder people and kill people and fight like that, but he understood that it had to be done, but you could also do it in the most humane way possible. And I think I just think that's super cool. And it doesn't discount anyone who did it in any other way, but I just think that that's like he stuck to that and they won with it. And so yeah, so I think that kind of sums up Amilcar Cabral. And also mentioning he had this talk about the weapon of theory, and I just wanted to make it known that he always understood that there couldn't, that movements had to be inseparable with socialism. And he understood, and he talked about the fact that either you stick with the path of capitalism and neocolonialism and imperialism, and you go that route, or you actually go. There's only two answers, and so he understood that you can't go the capitalist way. You can't go the neo-colonial way. You can't go the imperialist way. The only way forward is socialism, and that it's inseparably tied to national liberation, especially of the nations in Africa, but obviously everywhere. And we understand that we can't get. He understood, and he wanted to make it known, and we understand that without socialism, there is no progress. There is no radical transformation in the sense of society where women are free from patriarchy, where we're free from exploitation, where the workers are able to to reap the benefits of their labor. And so yeah, I just think that's important to understand that there is no revolution without theory, and there is no theory without practice, and that shit is tied to socialism. And yeah.
Cool, that's great. We go into the next part. That was amazing. I have nothing to add. Sweet. So COVID updates.
Oh yeah. So COVID updates. I don't know. I'll just be real informal with this. We understand that like basically all the mask mandates have been repealed throughout like the country, and almost everywhere I go, I see there's like people with no masks. At work, I get asked why I wear a mask and stuff like that. It's funny, kind of, not really, but yeah. So we understand that the mask mandates have been repealed. We understand that vaccinations are. I don't know if it's already been done, but I'm pretty sure they're at the very least headed to not being covered by not being covered. You have to have insurance, and so if you don't have insurance, you're gonna have to pay out of pocket, which I think is like $150 or 120, something like that for the vaccines. So they stopped that. All the aid that was going to COVID stuff and to help us bolster those the COVID efforts in the country were basically sent to Ukraine and other places. So yeah, we're at a point in time where the government basically acts like, COVID is done, and we got to live with it, and to the point where where we understand that they're not recording data um, accurately, if at all, about infections, hospitalizations, and deaths. And so it's unfortunate. It's sad. I'm only giggling because it's kind of insane to me. But I know people. A lot of people. I hear a lot of people. They say that they're tired of the COVID talk and stuff like that. And I think that's what the government wanted from us and stuff like that. We can talk. The vaccines, and we can talk about that ad nauseum. But we understand that like for us, that was never supposed to be just a one be all. You can't just fucking erase a pandemic, however you think it came about. You can't just erase it with a vaccine. You have to have other measures in place, and it has to be a multi-pronged effort to contain the virus. And so we should have had our government lock us down and pay us to stay home, and um, um, suspend rent, suspend mortgages for people who have mortgages, suspend. We should have had our government do that. You know what I'm saying? We should have had our government funding our vaccines and our tests, and they should be readily available and not have a million car lines from like we saw back in the earlier days, or not even covered because if you don't have insurance, so we should have had our government take care of us. And we see how different it is in Cuba, in China, and people like you hear the mainstream media get all, but at what cost type bullshit with China. And China has had 12 deaths in 12 months from COVID, but at what cost? And so we see how good they see how a government, when governments actually care about their people, how it's supposed to go. But for us, we're just told to go back to work and die. You get no money. Food's gonna rise because we're doing shit in Ukraine. You're gonna have to pay more for food and all this. So it just we can be tired of COVID and stuff like that all we want, but at the same time, it's here and they don't give a fuck about us. So yeah, I think it's important to me to continue to wear a mask and just try to do everything you can, like fucking stay safe and stay away from people who don't give a shit.
But yeah, I just want to add that. So when Trump was in office, the COVID response was better, objectively. Not because Trump was a good president, but because I guess it was like new. It was like that new pandemic feeling, and they felt like they had to take it seriously because it wasn't clear how severe it was going to be and who was dying. But I remember when the shift started to happen, when it became clear that it was mostly African colonized people, working class people, disabled people, elders who were dying. The ruling class was like, oh, well, we can lose those people. So the approach began to shift, and as did Trump's rhetoric. And one of the things he started saying was that the reason why the cases are so high is because we're doing so much testing. If we want the cases to go down, we should stop testing. And I remember when he said things like that, there was like, rightfully like outrage and like indignation and people being like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like he got as negative a response to that as he did to like telling people to inject bleach and whatnot. Then Biden, campaigns against Trump in the 2020 election, and his whole platform is about listening to the science on COVID, listening to the science on climate change, how there is this objective form of science, and he's going to listen to it, god damn it, and he's going to post out this pandemic. And then he got into office, and all of the protections from the Trump administration expired. Like the eviction moratorium put in place by the CDC was overturned by federal courts. The unemployment extension expired. The child tax credit all of a sudden had to be paid back. So all of these programs that were put in place under Trump all of a sudden did not exist anymore under Biden. Really, the only one that's left is the extension on paying back student loans, and they just like keep kicking it down like a few months. Like it comes up to expire, and they're like, okay, you don't have to pay it for another 3 months. And it comes up to expire, and they say you don't have to pay it for another 3 months. So that's the only thing that's really left. And now I feel like people don't understand like what the Biden administration has actually done. Not only did they allow all these COVID protections to expire, but the CDC under Biden changed how COVID numbers are reported to intentionally obscure the next wave. The data that you see when you go to the CDC dashboard about community transmission is a week old. It's also based on the extremely limited number of COVID-19 tests that are still being tracked. Right now, we have a proliferation of at-home antigen tests that when people take that in the privacy of their homes, it's not reported anywhere really, unless they choose to, whether or not they're positive. So the data we have is from PCR tests in facilities that submit that reporting to the CDC. So already off top, we're missing hundreds of thousands of positives, but also they don't update that goddamn dashboard until a week later. The other thing, like Rashad said, is that the reporting protocols for hospitals has been drastically changed, and it's happening on a state-by-state basis. For example, in New Hampshire, they said that we are only going to report COVID-19 hospitalizations if they get this specific kind of treatment. It doesn't matter if they test positive for COVID in the hospital. They have to test positive for COVID, be in the hospital, and receive these specific kinds of treatment. That's the only way the state of New Hampshire is going to track that as a COVID hospitalization. What does that tell you? That the hospitalization numbers are way off too. So now what is happening is that the most accurate transmission data that's available is coming from that wastewater measure, like that's looking at traces of COVID in people's poop and using that to see what COVID rates are in a particular area. The problem with that, even though it is the best measure that still exists, is that there are a number of places that do not collect wastewater data. For example, the city of Albuquerque, where I live, just started collecting it a few weeks ago. So even that number, which is again the best measure available after all of these rule changes, is itself not widely available across the nation. It's only if the city decides to do it, the individual community decides to do it. There's no coordination on a federal level. All of that together tells you that we are not in any way, shape, or form getting accurate numbers of COVID infections. But what we are seeing, it's like happening in the background, because the news is no longer talking about COVID. The Biden administration is like, but the midterms, we're going to pretend like this is over. We're going to move forward. And in the background, like 2,000 people a week are still dying. And in the background, if you look at the community transmission data, even though it's a week old, you see the Northeast, the Southeast, and increasing parts of the Southwest having higher and higher transmission numbers. We see anecdotally hospital workers and emergency care workers reporting like huge spikes in hospitalization and positive COVID results. So we can see, like, simmering under the surface, clearly another wave is here. But again, the Biden administration deliberately manipulated the data in order to obscure when the next wave is coming. I want to be clear with you. Like, during the Trump administration, the numbers were still off because there was no like centralized testing strategy or contact tracing strategy, but they were much more accurate than they are now. And then the Biden administration deliberately changed the reporting standards to obscure what's really happening so that these people could win the midterms, which, by the way, they're not going to do. They're not going to do it. They're going to get wrecked. And in 2024, we're getting a Republican president. I hope y'all know that. So I just want to make it clear to y'all that this man campaigned on listening to science. This man campaigned on having a better COVID response than Trump. And in every possible measure, it is much, much, much worse. And all of the current studies are saying that on the trajectory we're on right now in the United States, this pandemic is not going to be over for years. 4 years. It's going to keep spreading out of control in people who do not have access to medical care, including vaccinated people. It's going to continue to mutate into more and more variants. Right now, we're dealing with like BA1, BA2.1, and there's now BA4 and 5 being tracked in Tanzania. So it's not going away. There's going to continue to be more variants. It's going to be years of this. Years. And this did not have to be this way. And the other thing I want to say is that, The US used the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, to attack China. Trump called it the China virus. There's still, conspiracy theories about it being released from the Wuhan lab and all whatnot. Even though there's increasing evidence that COVID-19 was found in European nations and in the United States long before it was discovered in China. China just rang the alarm because China has functioning public health infrastructure, so they were able to let people know what happened, but then they got blamed for it. But China has obviously drastically handled the pandemic in a drastically different way, had much lower deaths. Even though the first reported cases were in China, China has a fraction of the deaths of the United States, and the constant accusation is that China is lying about their numbers. China is hiding their numbers. Well, what the hell is the CDC doing? What is the Biden administration doing? They are hiding their numbers. Do you still believe these people about their assessment of China's COVID response at this point? Do you still believe those accusations that were made without any evidence whatsoever that leaned upon people's internalized xenophobia to demonize China when China was helping its citizens and its world to fight the pandemic? Do you see what's happening now? Do you see the fucking bullshit? Oh my God, it's ridiculous. The US is hiding their numbers. They're hiding their numbers, and they're making the situation worse for the entire planet. Not just for poor working class African people within these borders, but for the entire planet that's having to deal with this ongoing pandemic and Americans traveling over the planet as little disease vectors. It's bananas. If we had taken the zero COVID response approach that China did, if we had taken the organized public health response that Cuba did, we would not still be dealing with this 4 years in. We would have been out of this if they had prioritized life instead of profit. The only reason that we are still dealing with having to mask up and social distance, the only reason why we're talking about a fourth goddamn booster is because the people in power, the people that many of y'all voted for, never had any intention of organizing the kind of pandemic response we needed to survive. They always prioritized the profits of these corporations that are exploiting us. And now the consequence is we got 5 more years of this shit at minimum. So yeah, continue to wear a mask, continue to social distance, continue to honestly avoid crowded indoor spaces. It's just not safe. And also join an organization. Join an organization, start building independent political power in your community, start organizing community defense programs to meet people's material needs. Because like Rashad said, food shortages are coming. It's about to get very, very, very bad. So we understand these people are going to leave us to die. It is currently happening. And so we can either watch that happen and do nothing, or we can organize collectively to meet the needs of our community to ensure our survival. These are the options. Do nothing, watch and die, or organize and survive. That's it. That's it. So yeah. Let me see. Were you gonna say something, Rashad?
Yeah, a couple things. Well, yeah, I think you were looking in the chat, but yes, it's Tatina Sia's birthday tomorrow. My cousin's birthday is tomorrow too. So yeah, April is a good month. April is a great month for birthdays. Um, but yeah, but I think that's the way the U.S. treats. I don't know, but okay. So what you were saying about organizing or die, basically, I don't know. I think that's just that's a point I don't think people are taking to heart. You know what I mean? And so, bringing back Cabral a little bit, he always talked about, he always talked about you either, you had, and I think he got it from Fanon, but he talked about you either fulfill the duty that you have or you betray that shit. And so, there's a lot of shit going on, and they're literally trying to. We're at the point of just a bunch of different disasters, ecologically, socially, whatever the fuck you would call a virus, pandemic. We're in a pandemic, a global pandemic, and it's just these people don't give a shit about us or our lives, and so if we don't come up with a solution, and we don't organize ourselves in the manner that the PAIGC did, with extreme care for people and extreme carefulness and analyzing our situation where we're at in our moment in time, we're in big ass trouble. We're like in extreme danger. And so like I saw a post the other night that was talking about like ecological disaster and stuff like that, and how we're, you know, like through like global um uh not global warming, but yeah, climate change is like, it's, you know, we're getting to a point where we're basically too late. Um and so, you know, people talk about doomism and stuff like that, and I understand, like, I'm not trying, you know, I'm not like saying we don't have a chance, but we don't got a chance if we don't organize ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, that's when we're doomed. If we don't actually collectively decide, like, this shit's enough, you're not about to just sit up here and kill us in a million different ways. I don't give a fuck how the pandemic. I mean, I do give a fuck because I know it came from some white countries. I know it did, but I don't give a fuck if they manufactured it themselves, if they created it or whatever. I don't. That doesn't matter to me. If it came from some fucking lab, it's here, and they don't give a shit about us, like, or the rest of the world. Like, so, you know, in some, you know, decent, you know, in some kind of ways, they care about their own selves. You know, Euro America cares about themselves, but we understand in the spirit of Cabral that, like, fucking, if we don't get our shit together and stop like hanging on to their own like fucking roots and their own like disruption of the way we fucking do things, the way like humans, like human actual human progression, we're fucked. And so yeah, we gotta have that same type of energy that Cabral did, and he was just, you know, he was supremely focused on liberation, and like, it's, I mean, we see why, and so, you know, they won, and so we have to win too, and so yeah, I think that's just, yeah, I'll say that. That's it.
And then also, I mean, they weren't just fighting Portugal, they were fighting NATO.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because when you talk about the necessity of revolution in people that are not yet conscious, oftentimes the response you get is like, it's not possible, we have no chance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, we're like 20 years out, 30 years out from the revolution in Guinea-Bissau. We have access to technological advances that they could never have imagined. We are able to communicate with each other across the planet in the matter of seconds. They didn't have any of that shit. And they were still able to organize every sector of society in Guinea-Bissau around this objective of liberation. They were able to build literally like the nucleus of the state that would form after they gained independence as they were being bombed and napalmed by NATO powers. They organized schools, they organized food production, they organized defense, all under constant bombardment by the combined forces of the most powerful imperialist powers on this planet. If they were able to do that under those conditions with a fraction of the technological advances, but an extremely high level of organization, that lets you know it's absolutely possible for us to do a similar thing. It's absolutely possible for us to organize as communities in a way that's going to enable us to form a coherent COVID response. It's absolutely possible for us to organize defense of our communities if the police are known that they are not welcome. It's absolutely possible for us to organize food production where we live, to feed our blocks, to feed our neighborhoods. The problem is not that we are up against a powerful enemy, because every single liberation struggle in the history of the world was, whether we're talking about the Haitian Revolution, we're talking about the war in Vietnam, whether we're talking about the Cuban Revolution, whether we're talking about Guinea-Bissau, whether we're talking about Algeria, whether we're talking about Mozambique, every single time they were up against what appeared on paper to be a much more powerful enemy. And every single time they were ultimately successful because of superior organization. So when people say, like, we have no chance, there's nothing we could do, we're doomed, they're too strong, it's a cop-out. It's a cop-out coming just from a scared ass place. And I understand why people are scared. I understand why it feels futile, because the enemy works really hard to make us feel that way. But we have to learn from our history. We have to learn from these victories. We have to follow these examples, and not as people living in the useless ass Western left just criticize those projects from our couches and refuse to learn from them. No, like, clearly it can be done because it's been done before. We have to step up and play our position in this particular historical moment, because it is the difference between the future of life on this planet and death for all of us, period. And I, for one, do not intend to wait to die. Y'all can go fuck yourselves. I'm gonna fight. And so is Rashad. So yeah. Cool. Emma says, I want to find lessons from the PAIGC. They had one of the best systems of dual power during the liberation struggle. Absolutely. Like I said, they were able to form like literally the foundation of the state that the Guinea-Bissau had after they won their independence. They were able to do that. And that's like unique within African liberation struggles on the continent. And yep, you said, I think it would be very close to what's proposed in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by Nkrumah. Zizwe said earlier in the chat that much of the inspiration for the AA, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the All African Committee for Political Coordination, and the All African People's Revolutionary Army was taken from the organization of struggles against Portuguese colonialism that was organized by Guinea-Bissau, by Amilcar Cabral, that included the MPLA and Frelimo, the PAIGC. So it's absolutely right. And also, that's always the example I think of when people say that Pan-Africanism isn't possible. I'm like, then what was the C1CP doing? How were these different African nations able to come together on a Pan-African basis to wage the struggle against Portuguese colonialism? Why is it that the AAPRP and the AACPC is able to unite all 5 or 6 different national liberation struggles across the continent from different regions, different cultures? Clearly, it's possible. So yeah.
And they trained, the PAIGC in the beginning, they trained in Ghana with Kwame Nkrumah, and he, Sekou Touré in Guinea, obviously being the neighbors of the folks in Guinea-Bissau, PAIGC headquarters was in Guinea. And so we understand that Sekou Touré also helped find the motherfuckers who killed Cabral. And so, and I think it was Zizwe in the chat or someone. Oh no, someone asked. I think it was T asked if didn't Cabral help form the MPLA, which is the liberation movement in Angola, and yeah, he also helped form that with Agostinho and one of their other comrades, a couple of other comrades. But yeah, he also helped form that too. And so like like you said, it's not impossible. We got to actually fucking do it. We just got to actually like understand the mission and like what's at stake, because like you said, it's sink or swim, bro. And so that's actually what drove me into to joining the party. And so I'm like super glad that I joined, because there was a time where I was super fucking just discouraged and shit like that. Like I was extremely pessimistic, and I was like, bro, there's no way. I was like, there's just no way any of this is gonna work. Like, and I just really wanted to give up. And then I read George Jackson, and I read Blood in My Eye, and I read the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by Kwame Nkrumah, and I was like, it kicked me in the ass, and I was like, bro, yeah, like I mean, I understand, like it was dire before, like our situation was dire in the 70s, and so like all of us choose to like fight, or you don't, and you betray it. And so like I could have gave up, or we could all give up and say, oh, it's fucking too hard. Oh man, you either do that or you fucking say, well, okay, yeah, this is hard, but I have to fight regardless. And so that's what we have to do. And I know the folks in the chat. I fuck with all you guys. David Silberg, Big Teal, obviously Ricky, Salifu was in the chat, KD's in the chat, Emma. I fuck with all you guys, and I know we're all we're all working. And so yeah, I love you. I fuck with you guys. I don't know you. I haven't met most of you guys, any of you guys, but I thank you guys for being in the chat, and Anya and the rest of the party and everything. So
nice. Well, with that in mind, let's talk about some current events without plunging into doomerism, because on paper it seems very bad. But if we understand the example of the PIGC, then we understand that it's not an unwinnable situation. So some things that are going on that I want to raise are, did you know, Rashad, that there is currently an outbreak of bird flu in the United States that has killed millions of birds, including chickens and turkeys?
The only reason why I do know is because I think you put something in the group chat about it, or someone.
Yeah.
But that's the only reason why, because they don't talk. I didn't even hear it on the, I tried and watch the news, and I heard, at the very least Twitter, but nothing.
Cool. Yeah, I forgot I put that in the Slack. But yeah, I actually randomly saw someone talking about it on Twitter, and I was like, wait, what? Because I had never heard about it on the news. But I want to read some excerpts from this article, because like we already talked about, there are going to be food shortages as a consequence of these sanctions that the US government and the European Union have applied against Russia. It's going to impact the distribution of wheat. It's going to impact the access to fertilizers, because Russia is a major exporter of wheat and fertilizers, which means we're going to see reduced yields across the entire world, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and including in the United States. So already that is happening as a consequence of self-destructive Western foreign policy. And now I want to share another consequence of capitalist environmental destruction that is also going to contribute to these food shortage issues that are coming, y'all. They are coming. Do not just watch the train crash. We have to organize to attempt to mitigate this. So the current strain of H5N1, which again is bird flu, was first reported in Asia and Europe. In the UK, eggs can no longer be labeled free range because hens have been cooped up for months to avoid infection. Since the USDA confirmed the first US case in a wild duck in South Carolina in mid-January, infections have been reported in commercial farms and backyard flocks in at least 30 states, including Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Indiana, Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, etc. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports that so far the H5N1 pandemic is primarily an animal health issue with no known human infections in the U.S. However, H5N1 has a very high mortality rate, and the longer and larger the wave of outbreaks, the higher the chances it could mutate into a strain that is more infectious to humans. So that's important, because as good as biosecurity measures may be, critics of the commercial poultry industry say factory farming, which sees tons of thousands of birds crammed into huge sheds, has created an environment where the bird flu can thrive. If you were trying to design a system to ultimately spread disease, you couldn't design a better one than modern poultry farming, said Andrew DeCorrales, executive director of the sustainable agriculture nonprofit Farm Forward. A single farm can have anywhere from 1 to 10 barns in the field with 500,000 or more birds on the ground. The threat of housing animals by the tens of thousands is a huge risk. It gives viruses a huge population of hosts to prey on, to mutate, and to thrive. Aside from the farms themselves, the industry has spent decades modifying the genetics of chickens and turkeys to get them as big as possible, as fast as possible, at the expense of their immune systems. So as of the writing of this article, I'll put in the CNET, it was released on April 23rd, 2022. Farmers have killed 27 million chickens and turkeys in commercial poultry farms across the United States. The consequence of that, and I'm sure that y'all have noticed, is that the price of chicken has skyrocketed as a consequence of having to kill off those birds, as a consequence of labor shortages, thanks to COVID. Do y'all remember how the poultry farms were like sites of huge infections during the height of the lockdown because they were still open? And also because of supply chain issues that are going to be exacerbated by the sanctions on Russia. The average cost of eggs is up 44% from this time last year, and they are anticipating that those prices will continue to rise, up to doubling. So bird flu outbreak currently happening in the United States. It is a direct consequence of the capitalist mode of production, because they literally bred these birds to be perfect vectors for this virus, and then they house them in barbaric conditions where they have no room to even like spread their wings, that allows the virus to go from chicken to chicken to chicken extremely rapidly. And the consequence, 27 million chicken and turkeys having to be killed as a consequence of contracting bird flu, no end in sight. And the longer that it spreads, the farther that it spreads, the more chance that it's going to mutate and infect human beings. And we've talked about where COVID-19 has come from on the show a few times, particularly last year. And the theory that we put forward is that is a consequence of capitalist destruction of the environment, capitalist growth destroying ecosystems, destroying the habitats of creatures, and releasing pathogens that human beings have never been exposed to and have no immunity to. If you look at the paper trail, if you look at credible scientific studies, that appears to be where COVID-19 came from. People like to do like the lab leak theory or Chinese bioweapons, but the reality appears to be much more mundane. This global economic system of capitalist imperialism is destroying the environment, and with that destruction, it is releasing viruses, it is releasing pathogens that human beings are being wrecked by. So, if that is where COVID-19 actually came from, you can see from that article about the bird flu where the next one's going to come from. And like we've said on the show many, many times, there is going to be another COVID-19. There will be another global pandemic. If these are coming from environmental destruction, the environmental destruction has not stopped, which means there will be another one. And we already know what's going to happen. They're going to leave us to die, which is, again, another strong argument for joining an organization, getting active in the struggle for justice, helping to build the independent political power of the masses of African and poor and working class people. Because if we leave it up to these people in charge, we are all going to get catch for bird flu or die in the slow heat death of the planet. So yeah.
And it's just amazing. Like you just think about it. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna say that the labs are perfect. I understand that. Like, I understand the way other viruses have come, but like, dude, there's no. I mean, those fucking lab people be pretty goddamn careful with their shit, bro. Like, I'm just gonna give them that. Like, they understand like how to not fucking let shit escape, man. And if you look at how other viruses have came just in history, that's what the fuck it comes through animals, and it comes from the way we handle animals and the environment. If we can consciously understand that we're destroying the environment and that the way we grow things has been bad for fucking decades, and the mass globalization of the planet and how all these things are being fucking transported internationally. To me, it just feels like, I mean, that's like, they can't say it like that, because then people are gonna be like, well, damn, well, maybe we should actually start being independent. Like, maybe this country should, or maybe this country should only trade with people within his region. Oh fuck, that's crazy. Like, that's crazy talk. So like, I think, that's something that's like clear to me that they wouldn't want us to like start connecting the dots on. Fucking, they don't give a shit if you fucking spin the dumbass wheel of like it was manufactured, or like they're planting some fucking chip in our head. And come on, just think about it. Like, it all has to do with the way they actually make money. They make money off of international trade and blocking people, other nations from trading with nations that are closer to them that make more sense, because they have to have complete domination of profits and monopoly and of various sectors of agriculture and resources. And so it's just, I get that, a lot of us don't understand, like, the broad masses don't like necessarily understand imperialism, and we've been, not told the true nature of how capitalism actually works and how it can affect us, and how it does affect us in every single facet of our lives. Like, all the negative shit comes from that. And so, like, I understand that, they don't want us to know that. But at the same time, like, bro, like, a lot of people claim to be history majors, and you can see it. It's right there. So, I don't know.
They'll really make up, like, and it does benefit the ruling class, the exploiters, because we'll be talking about like the Illuminati. We'll be talking about, just like all kinds of like wild aliens building the pyramids or whatnot. And meanwhile, they're like in plain sight, just like fucking everything up. You know what I'm saying? They're just like getting no smoke. Elon Musk, people think is like the real life Tony Stark. And he's like one of the main motherfuckers profiting from the destruction and exploitation. Like, they really get away with murder because of the proliferation of these conspiracy theories, when the reality of the situation, like, it's documented. They're not trying to hide it. You can find the receipts. It's very, very clear. But they really, I wouldn't be surprised if like the origin of the conspiracy theory was the ruling class itself, because it really insulates them from any kind of smoke. It protects them. It keeps us like chasing after ghosts while they are destroying everything around us. And the other thing about this bird flu is, like, I'm not a vegan. I grew up eating meat, but reading that they genetically modified chickens to make them as big as possible, and in the process, like, destroyed their immune systems, and now like millions of chickens are dying, is like horrifying on like a soul level. Like, the more socialist and anti-imperialist I get, the more aligned I feel with all forms of life on the planet. Maybe I will end up a vegan, but just like it's like so monstrous. It's so monstrous, and it's not like you literally created the conditions for the next global pandemic by fucking with chickens. Like, these chickens were just out there living their lives. They're like feeding us. It makes me so upset. Like, it makes me so upset that they did that. Like, leave the chickens alone. They were already feeding people. We don't actually need to produce chickens that quickly and that big. We could just localize food production instead of shipping this shit all over the planet and like using up, releasing all these carbon emissions. Like, it was fine. It was fine. We could have just organized production to make sure everybody was fed instead of organizing production for profit and genetically modifying chickens to become disease vectors. Like, it's like so evil that I can't, like, I can't even express it. Like, it makes me so upset. Ugh.
And they
now
like, oh, my bad. Keep going.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, but now they act like, it's like, I mean, I get that they say Americans, like, it's for like, Americans and we want this, but bro, they didn't ask us, nigga. Like, they didn't fucking say, hey man, do you want to make us like, so like, I'm just confused on where they got the idea to that. Like, now we like it because you fucking infected us with fucking like some chemical warfare bullshit. You genetically modified these things to make us want more of your shit. You didn't ask us if we wanted that, and now it's like, oh well, if Americans just didn't, I get it. It is kind of partially our fault now, but like, bro, that they eat that shit on us. Fucking, I eat McDonald's because they fucking conditioned me to eat McDonald's since I was a kid, bro. Like, it's bullshit. Fucking, it's bullshit, and they like want to put everything on us. Oh, fucking, environment, the environment's going fucking global warming and shit like that, climate change. Oh, that's our fault. Now we have to stop using straws and fucking. Bro, they're the ones who did all this shit and the ones responsible, but then they heap it all on us, and then they like, and then they say we're being doomerists and like fucking, or we're not doing it. Like, it's just crazy. I mean, it's just like fucking, and it's crazy because like, talking about Cabral again, he was an agronomist, and he like, it's just crazy how he was talking about like, bro, the way they were doing Guinea-Bissau back then is the way they do the whole world, growing monocrops and allowing that to rule the whole like agricultural sector. You can't fucking grow 1, 2, or 3 crops throughout a whole fucking landmass and expect like the soil to be okay and expect people to actually survive on that. You have to have, and Cabral talked about it in his like in some of his writings and stuff like that. I think it was his is a paper he wrote for graduation, I think, but and he just talked about the necessity of a variety of different crops to grow. And it's just, I mean, it's not like a secret either. Like, the native and indigenous populations around the whole fucking goddamn world have like, that's the way they've been doing it, and they were fine. And it's only the interruption of these fucking Euro-American colonial powers that interrupted these ways of growing and tending to the land that have been done for thousands of years. And it's only that's led to it. And it's like, in such a short amount of time, dude, like such a short amount of time. I think like, it's just crazy how like they get, you can see it, and they be sitting there for years. They argued, it was coming. And then it was like, well, actually we go through this type of thing. We go through planet warming. And so they went back and forth on that for years. And like, it wasn't like, oh, well, all right, is the data actually skewed? Well, no, bro, look at it's been like 150 years. And you see how drastic the shit has got, bro. So like, let's not play games, man. Like, but that's what they be doing. They play games with our lives because they don't give a fuck. They either know they're going to die. And if they feel like they're not going to die before the planet goes, fucking Elon Musk is talking about fucking slave labor on Mars, basically fucking indentured servitude on Mars. Like, we'll just have people fucking take out loans to go to Mars. And if they can't pay it, we'll make them work for it. So, all right, exactly.
I want to really quickly address this comment from Emma. I still don't understand why Russia and Ukraine grow 1/3 of the world's wheat. So in the Hood Communist group chat, We talk a lot of shit, but we also do investigations of random things. So we actually talked about this like a few weeks ago because we it was clear early on that the sanctions on Russia and the military operation in Ukraine would have a drastic impact on the global food supply. For example, Russia is the primary exporter of grain to many African nations. So we're going to see food shortages across the continent. And the reason why that happened is really interesting. It's climate change, y'all. Like, I don't know about you. When I think about Russia, when I think about Ukraine, when I think about that part of the world at all, I think about it being like really cold, like permanent winter. However, climate change that is melting the glaciers and ice caps, that is like revealing arable lands in Antarctica for the first time in like a millennia, is doing the same thing across Russia. So at the same time as it's becoming too hot and dry in a lot of places in the United States to grow food anymore, it's also warming up massive sections of Russia, like in the Siberian tundra, and opening up all this new lands for agriculture. And Russia took advantage of this. So this, I hope this link works, because it's behind it. It's an article on the Financial Times, and it's behind a paywall. So I put it on this website, 12foot.io, that lets you remove the paywall. So I hope that works. But in this article, it's basically talking about how after Crimea had its referendum and chose to become part of Russia, Russia was hit with all these sanctions from the European Union and the US. And the Russian government at that point was like, well, clearly, they are going to keep messing with us economically. They are going to keep attempting to undermine us and cause instability. And so we have to figure out a way to become more economically independent so that the next time this happens, it will have less of an impact domestically. And so part of what Russia did was begin to revitalize its indigenous agriculture industry, which included prioritizing the growing of wheat in these new areas that climate change had opened up. So again, at the same time as climate change is reducing the area where food can be grown in the United States, it's opening up whole new areas for agriculture in Russia. It's very interesting. So they prioritize the development of agriculture. They prioritize the development of biotech. They started working to produce more and more and more of the goods and commodities they needed within Russia instead of importing them, which, if you listen to Putin's speech on February 24th, the evening the military operation started, he was like, we know what y'all are going to do and we're ready. And I'm pretty sure that's what he meant. So yeah, it's very interesting. And that's a major part of the reason why Russia is like a major supplier of the world's wheat, because they prioritize the development of those industries as that land opened up as a consequence of capitalist environmental destruction. And then the other thing I wanted to say about Russia and wheat is that it's interesting when you actually examine the deals that Russia makes with African countries. You may have noticed that in the West, it's like, fuck Russia all the time. But in Africa, they're either quiet or they're pro-Russia. And the reason for that is that Russia constantly makes trade agreements with African nations that are not only not exploitative, but also in some cases are designed to increase the economic independence of those nations. So I'm trying to find the description of a deal that Russia made with Egypt, basically saying, we will help you develop your own capacity. There it is. We will help you develop your own capacity to grow wheat. Like, you can buy wheat from us, and we are also going to help you grow your own. I just found it. So I just put it in the chat. So like, when you look at the trade agreements that Russia is making with African nations, you find things like that a lot, where they're like, we're going to give you wheat for a fair price. We're going to help you make your own. So it can kind of understand, like, people attributed a lot of it to like USSR nostalgia, because the USSR supported liberation struggles across the African continent at the same time as the US and NATO powers were backing the colonizers in those struggles. So certainly that's probably a big part of it. But also, if you examine the relations that Russia in the modern day, like capitalist Russia, has with African states, you find something very, very different than what the US and EU powers are doing. So that's just like a little bit of an aside about why Russia and Ukraine are like the breadbasket of the world. Climate change caused by capitalist environmental destruction. It's that like the way the capitalist countries, the Western countries are like self-owning is like so widespread and comprehensive where you're just like, damn, like there's no possible way they could have anticipated this was happening. But just the fact that they have created the conditions for like new land to open up in Russia, for land to be closing up the United Snakes, for all these countries to be like turning towards China and Russia because they know they can't trust the West anymore. Like they're really like setting themselves up for like a huge fall. It's pretty bad. So yeah, thoughts?
I just think it's funny, like you said, like they do this shit because it's like, I don't know. I'd always be wondering, like, I don't know. I be tripping, but like, so I always be wondering, like, if like they plan these things out, and I know they plan them out, but they're smart. They are smart. They're also hella dumb, and they just do dumb shit that I'm like, well, bro, like, why would you do that? Like, any like normal, like, it doesn't make any sense. But they're like, they think it's crazy because they're like so long-sighted, but they're also like their true nature is that they're extremely short-sighted. They're just looking for the next fucking profit, like right then. And at the very least, they extend it like maybe 5-10 years out. They don't really give a shit. They just keep kicking the buck. And I think that's because of the two-party system. They're able to like, oh, well, that's going to be the next president. Or if it's me, I'll be able to maintain a little bit of shit in the 8 years, and I'll be able to make, I'll be able to make the ruling class as much money in the 8 years. And, it is what it is. But I just, like you said, they just self-own all the time. Like they really set up the whole, and I think, but then I remember I come back to like, that's low-key just capitalism because it really sets up its own, I don't know. I've been thinking about like the universe, like it contracts and it expands and it contracts. Like you can't continuously expand and expect nothing to, like, it just keeps going. No, it doesn't work like that, bro. And so we understand that capitalism, it eats up everything until the point that it basically implodes on itself. And so we're like, I'm not gonna say we're getting close to that point, but they're gonna have to keep covering up, and like it's covering up they're like the fucking holes in the I have to keep covering up them leaks because holes just keep coming out, and you see water leaking, and they're just like fucking putting tape over all of them, and eventually they're gonna run out of goddamn hands. And so we got to be there and ready for when they fucking run out of hands to plug these damn assholes that they be poking themselves.
Yeah, I think they're already running out of hands, and the issue is that in capitalist nations, when recession happens, when economic devastation happens, if we look at history, what happens if there isn't a left alternative, a progressive alternative that's strong enough and organized enough to seize power, what usually happens is fascism. Like that's what happened in Germany in the period between World War I and World War II. The economic devastation came home, and there was no organized left that had the capacity, the level of organization to step into the vacuum, and so instead the Nazis did. You know what I'm saying? If you look at history, it happens that way. What's that?
Portugal.
Exactly. Yes. If you look, and also that's why Trump was elected, because neoliberalism had failed utterly to meet the needs of people during worsening conditions. I just watched The Big Short about the 2008 financial collapse.
Love that
Man,
movie.
I didn't know a lot of those details. I was like, holy crap. Also, it's clearly happening again. That's another show. But like the Obama administration, Democrats in power, like helped all those people get away with it while millions of people lost their homes, their 401ks, their jobs. There was no consequences whatsoever. And like 10 years later, you see Donald Trump coming out the swamp being like, I'm on your side, and people bought it because the Democrats are supposed to be the left, and the Democrats are clearly not doing shit for people. This man was pretending to be on their side, so they're like, let's try this. And it's going to happen again. There's going to be someone worse than Trump. Farther to the right, the U.S. left is fragmented and impotent, to be quite honest with you. And so we're not going to be able to organize any kind of left alternative. And so the people are going to go right. We're going to fascism, y'all. That is the trajectory. So yeah. Any other thoughts you want to share before we go to the closing?
I have a quote to read from Cabral, but we'll read it at the closing.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, and I just wanted to share this comment from the Comrade 235 worldwide. Melting of the Arctic ice is a worry for Western capital only because it would give China and Russia access to minerals and alter trade routes between Europe and East Asia. Absolutely. I don't know if it's mentioned in that Financial Times article. I think it is, but if not, I'll find it. I'll find the article I was reading and post it. But absolutely, like the melting of the polar ice caps is literally opening up sea routes that the European Union and US do not yet have access to, but Russia completely controls. That is absolutely the case. And so when we analyze what's happening with this proxy war in Ukraine, we have to also take into consideration Russia is the largest nation in terms of landmass on the face of the planet. Russia has a number of precious minerals, a vast amount of arable land. Russia has also at times acted as both an imperialist power, but also as a nation constantly at risk of being colonized. Europe and the United States have constantly been trying to take control of Russia. That's why they helped collapse the USSR. That's why they backed Boris Yeltsin, because they thought that was going to be their guy and they could have Russia as a puppet state. And then Putin got in there and it didn't go to plan. But they want to colonize Russia. They are waging that proxy war in Ukraine, not to help Ukrainians, not to prevent a genocide, which even the US Department of Defense is refusing to call it a fucking genocide. They're not there to help Ukrainians. They are there to weaken Russia so they can ultimately straight up colonize it. So they can get that land, so they can get those resources, so they can get those newly opened, thanks to climate change, sea routes. People are being manipulated into believing this is a fight between good and evil in Ukraine. No, this is a fight for whether or not Russia is going to be a free nation. Ukraine was already colonized. That's how they got Nazis in power. The people did not choose that. That was imposed upon them. So Ukraine's sovereignty already fell. They are going for Russia and they're ultimately going for China. If they take Russia out, it's going to be much easier to go for China. So yeah, also a whole other show. But that's it. Let's move to the closing. What's that Cabral quote?
Okay, so yeah, in closing, we want to obviously give a shout out to Amilcar Cabral. He was one of the greatest to me, and I think to a good amount of people. He was like probably the greatest leader in 20th century, globally. Really, you can put him right up there with Ho Chi Minh and Mao and Nkrumah and Lenin and Castro, and you put him up all you put him up there with all of them. And so yeah, and the PAIGC, because we understand that they're still out there kicking today. And so like that for a revolutionary organization to last that long amongst all those like all the shit that they were up against, and that the internal discord that's going to come in any organization, but that was actually aided by their enemies, through all the midst of of all that, they're still able and they're still standing and stuff like that, and splits. And so yeah, I think that's extremely important. And like anyone, I think it's a clear view and a clear picture of what could be and what is and stuff like that, and how organization is important. And yeah, so yeah, I'll get to the quote. And so yeah, Amilcar Cabral said it was in a speech. It's in the book Return to the Source, but he gave a speech at Syracuse University in February 1970. And he said, "A people who free themselves from foreign domination will be free culturally only if, without complexes and without underestimating the importance of positive accretions from the oppressor and other cultures, they return to the upward paths of their own culture, which is nourished by the living reality of its environment, and which negates both harmful influences both by harmful influences and any kind of subjection to foreign culture. Thus, it may be seen that if imperialist domination has the vital need to practice cultural oppression, national liberation is necessarily an act of culture." And so, yeah, That's that.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the closing. We got some announcements about what's going on. First up, we got the next episode of Weekly Pan-African News happening Thursday, May 12th, 1 p.m. Mountain Time. The topic is honoring our ancestors. That's very broad. It's very broad. But we're going to do it. So Thursday, May 12th, 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Join us again. Also, here in Tiwa territory, we are reopening the Pan-African Community Garden for this year's season that is happening Sunday, May 14th at 5 p.m. So if you are in Tiwa territory in Albuquerque, or if you're in the Southwest and you feel like taking a road trip, come through Sunday, May 14th at 5 p.m. We're going to have some PE about fighting the patriarchy. We're going to have some collective work to clean up the garden beds and prepare them for spring and summer planting. And we're going to share some food as we always do. So we are very, very excited to be back out at the garden. And we are also hoping this year to begin to scale up production. We want to start to grow more food, get higher yields from the things we plant, because as we have discussed at length on this episode, food shortages are coming. They are here already. They are going to get much, much, much worse. Don't just watch it happen. Now that you know what's going on, organize a community garden in your community. Figure out how to grow food and share resources in the space you have. There's a comrade Phil Winter in the comments who has like the most prolific balcony garden I have ever seen in my life. Every time he posts a plant, I'm like, God damn, it makes me jealous. So it's possible, but we have to figure out, we have to be creative. We have to be organized. We have to begin to develop a collective response to what we know is coming. We know it's coming. Do not wait for someone to do anything to stop it for you. They're not going to. We have to save ourselves. So at the community garden, we're going to expand the beds. We're going to experiment with other low water strategies to increase yield, because we want to start feeding that whole neighborhood surrounding the garden. We are already feeding the elders from the garden. Now we want to feed the neighborhood. So get into it. Please join us Sunday, May 14th, 5 p.m. Also, it is the month of African Liberation Day, y'all. African Liberation Day is commemorated by the Worldwide Pan-African Movement on May 25th of every single year. This year, in partnership with the PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau, the AAPRP is organizing a 2-day African Liberation Day commemoration. On Tuesday, May 24th, we are going to have at 5 p.m. UTC, which is 10 p.m. Mountain Time, I believe, panel discussions on this year's African Liberation Day theme of fighting back against neocolonialism. So we're going to have a women's panel, as well as a panel of revolutionary African organizations all around the topic, smashing neocolonialism. And then the next day, Wednesday, May 25th, also at 5 p.m. UTC, we're going to have a live stream of, we will continue the analysis and strategic discussion from our sister party, the PIGC in Guinea-Bissau. I believe that's going to constitute a live stream of a march that's happening for African Liberation Day in Guinea-Bissau. Either way, you got to be there. You got to come through. You can join online virtually by registering at the link I just dropped in the chat, bit.ly/smash neocolonialism. I'll also put it on the screen, but register for African Liberation Day 2022 today. Become part of this commemoration, this worldwide Pan-African institution. Join us for those 2 days, Tuesday, May 24th, Wednesday, May 25th, 5 p.m. UTC, completely free. Please join us. And also, please help us spread the word. And then also, Pan-African Community Garden is opening back up. We want to scale up production. We want to build a shade structure. We want to have it have a sloped roof so that we can put a giant container under it and catch rainwater. Monsoon season is coming here in the Southwest in just a month or so. And so we're hoping to get that done before that, so we can get that sweet, sweet monsoon water. But we need resources to make that happen. The shade structure in particular is going to be quite expensive because we have to buy all the wood. We're going to build it ourselves with our comrade from Project Feed the Hood. But we got to get the wood. And the wood is extremely expensive, especially with these supply chain issues under capitalism. So we are calling out for donations of funds and resources to support our work at the Pan-African Community Garden. We'll also be posting on social media with the same ask. If you are Outside of Tiwa territory, outside of the Southwest, you can Venmo us at APRP-NM. If you're in the Southwest, please, we're taking donations of wood, we're taking donations of seedlings, we're taking donations of paint, anything that you can spare, tools, gardening tools, anything you can spare, any kind of condition, we can use it. We can use it. We literally built all of our raised beds from like scrap wood that we found for free on Craigslist. So we're not picky. We can make it work. So please donate to our Venmo if you want to share funds. And if you're in Tiwa territory, hit us up, message us on Instagram, give us a text at 505-295-008 or email us at aprpnewmexico@gmail.com to coordinate donations of goods and supplies. And we appreciate any contribution you can make to help support scaling up production at the Pan-African Community Garden so we can start feeding the people. Okay, that's it. So thank you so much for joining us today. We thank you so much for your comments, for your participation, for liking and sharing the stream to help us get more eyes on this analysis. We'll be back Thursday, May 12th. But in the meantime, comrades, if you are not active in an organization fighting for justice, we need you off the sidelines and in the fight. Please join an organization. If you are African, we welcome you within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We have actually grown quite a bit during the pandemic, which is amazing. It's a direct consequence of all the live streams and podcasts that APRP members have been producing. We've grown a lot. We can stand to grow more. We have a lot of work to do. So if you're African, please join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You can learn more at aprpintl.org. If you're not African, there are many, many organizations that are constantly recruiting, that are doing great work, that are looking for help. There is Black Rose Anarchist Federation if you're an anarchist. There's the IWW if you want to organize as a worker. There's the Democratic Socialists of America, which actually helped a lot at the Garden, and the International Committee Don't Miss. So even though they're not our political tendency, they're still doing good work. There's dozens of organizations, hundreds of organizations fighting for justice in our communities that need our support, that need our membership to increase their capacity. So comrades, the only way that we are going to survive what is coming, what capitalism has done to this planet, is if we are organized and fighting back and building a movement powerful enough to provide the alternative. So get off the sidelines, get into the fight, join organization, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.